Good morning. Welcome to the 2020 National Productivity Conference Webinar Series. I am Patty Herlia from the National Wages and Productivity Commission and co-facilitating this session with me is Attorney Alvin, who will be joining me later. So for those of you who have who have been with us since day one, September 3, we'd like to thank you for joining our webinars. We hope that you found our sessions informative and useful for you and your company. We are halfway through this 9-part webinar series, and which means after today, we will still be looking forward to 4 more equally interesting and relevant topics which will be handled by foreign and local experts that we've invited to join in this webinar series. Meantime, for those of you who have just tuned in, the National Productivity Conference is held every 2 years. It brings together experts, practitioners, and stakeholders discussing issues and developments affecting the country's competitiveness and productivity. And each conference has a theme. This year, our theme is driving productivity in a better normal because we'd like to focus all our discussions on the most important and perhaps the worst crisis this world has seen in decades, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic. What started out as a health issue has now exploded into a social, political, and economic crisis around the world. And countries are suffering from the economic standstill brought about by lockdown and containment measures. No one is spared, and more so the most vulnerable sectors of societies. And even if there are social protection systems in place, even that was not spared because the pandemic exposed the limitations and deficits of existing social protection systems in terms of coverage, adequacy, and to some extent, delivery mechanisms. And so countries now find themselves providing unprecedented income support measures and stimulus packages as we start seeing the most stringent forms of lockdowns being lifted and economies start opening up, yes, to restore livelihoods, to create employment, and to hopefully bring back wages to our workers' pockets. I would like to pause at this point. I will leave it to our speaker to talk lengthily on the impact of COVID on the world of work, unemployment, and labor incomes. So at this point, I'd like to go to some preliminaries, if I may. Our microphones and our cameras are disabled. Yes, thank you. Our microphones and cameras are disabled to prevent background noise. We invite everyone to please post your questions and your reactions, comments in the Q&A and chat boxes found at the bottom of your screens. And also there's a session evaluation form at the end. So please fill up the session evaluation forms before you leave. And at this point, to tee off the discussion, I would also like to request you to answer 3 short poll questions. And to our technical staff, can we already pull up the 3 poll questions? Thank you. So to provide our speaker an idea of the kind of mix that we have this morning. So to give him an idea of the sectors being represented here this morning, we'd like to ask you to please check the appropriate box that best describes the economic activity that your company is engaged in. So it's Is it agriculture, manufacturing, construction, trade, accommodation and food services, information technology, financial intermediation, health and social work services, and others or others? So please just tick the appropriate box before we go to the next poll question. Okay, are we done? Yes. Yes, thank you. Can we now pull up the second poll question? Okay. Which of the following have you adopted because of the pandemic? This is a multiple response question, so you can just check as many as applicable to your company, but don't forget to hit the submit button. So your choices are permanently laid off employees, temporarily reduced employment, reduce the number of working days per week, or reduce the number of work hours per day, adopted work from home arrangements, have you customized or gone into producing new products, or others? Again, this is a multiple response question. And for our third poll question, can we pull up? Thank you. What is the most important or urgent assistance you need from government today? Is it one, unemployment insurance for workers, financial assistance or credit, tax waivers or temporary tax breaks, rent subsidies, cash transfers, or others? So you just have to pick one. This is not a multiple response question. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. By the way, we are not only viewed via Zoom, we also be viewed through our Facebook page through live streaming. And for replays, you can catch us in our YouTube channel also. So we will present the results of the poll questions after our speaker's presentation. And for this morning, we are privileged to have with us an expert from the International Labor Organization. He's been with the International Labor Organization, or ILO, for over 10 years. He holds a doctorate degree in economics from Cambridge University. And before his current position, he was special advisor to the Deputy Director General for Policy on Economic and Social Issues. He also authored, or one of the authors of two of ILO's flagship reports, the Global Wage Report and the World Employment and Social Outlook. He has also written extensively on economic, employment, and labor issues, including those in the International Labor Review and the Socio-Economic Review. It is really a privilege to have with us a dear friend of the Commission and the Board to present Employment Outlook, the Director of the Employment Policy Department of the International Labor Organization. Please welcome Mr. Sangheon Lee. Sangheon, the floor is yours.
So good morning. Do you hear me clearly?
Yes, Sangheon.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, good morning. Yeah, good morning again. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to this exciting webinar event. As Patty mentions, I have been working with many people in the commission, especially on the minimum wage issues. I think that's a bit of a long time back, but I still have a very good memory of the time we spent together. And this is a bit early in the morning in Geneva at the moment. It's now 4 a.m. So I just woke up, and so my brain is not working very well. So please bear with me. What I'm going to do today for the next 30 minutes or so is to walk you through some of the analytical work we have done in the last 6 months or so to analyze what has been the impact of the pandemic on the world work. Because from the very beginning, of the pandemic, the ILO realized that this would lead to another serious global job crisis. And so we thought it's very, very important to monitor those impact and then share this the analysis with our constituents, help to assist them in developing the timely and also the rapid and also the well-grounded and the policy responses. So next slide, please. So this time we try to do this a bit more systematic way. So that's why we launched what we call the IILO Monitor, the COVID-19 and the world work. The first edition came out in March, early March, and then last week we actually published the sixth edition of the IILO Monitor. The document, this actually the flagship kind of the brief has been very well received so far. So it actually has been extensively cited in the major reports, and also it made the good coverage in the media as well. So oftentimes it made to the front page of the major newspapers, for example, Financial Times and Guardian, etc. So I'm going to share with you today what are the key findings from these actually 6 editions of the COVID-19 today. Next slide, please. I think I need to explain a bit more why we are very much worried about the pandemic and its impact on the world work. From very early stage. I think that has much to do with our previous experience with actually responding to the crisis. Probably the latest one is in terms of global scale is the Great Recession that actually broke out in 2007 and then reached the peak in 2008 and 9. Probably many of you may remember very well what happens at the time, but it's very important to look back and then to see what has happened and what are the lessons from this actually past crises. On the left side of the screen, I put together the global unemployment figures from the 2008 and 9, 7 and 8. So just immediately around the Great Recession. If you look at the bar chart, that actually represents the global unemployment rates for last around the 12 or 13 years. As you can see, as soon as the Great Recession took place, the unemployment increased very rapidly, and then you can see the gradual actually reduction in the global unemployment over time. What is the most important here is that it took almost more than 10 years actually to see our global unemployment figures back to the pre-crisis level. Many of you remember very well the relative speaking economic growth rate, especially GDP growth rate, returns to the pre-crisis level relatively quickly. It depends on countries, but globally speaking, it took almost 3 or 4 years. And in some countries, much faster. But unemployment was very slow to get back to the pre-crisis level. But the situation is much worse for the youth employment. For example, the line bar on the left side of the graph shows the unemployment for youth. As you can see from here, unemployment rate for young people, of course, immediately skyrocketed basically after the crisis broke out, but it never actually returns to the pre-crisis level. even before the pandemic began. That's a very important context. And at the same time, if we look at the labor income and productivities, and that's what actually I try to show on the right side of my screen. That's, you can see the chart. The bar above, the line, the top actual line is about the labor productivities, and the bottom line is the wage trend. From here, you can clearly see during the crisis, the Great Recession, I'm talking about previous crisis, labor productivities fell down and the wages as well. Then actually labor productivity managed to grow again in a couple of years of time after the crisis began. As you can see, steady growth of the labor productivities over the last 10 years or so. But wages also managed to grow a little bit, but it's far behind the labor productivities, which for that reason, you see the very significant, even the considerable gap between labor income, the wages and productivity. So this has been one of the important causes of the widening income inequality as we have seen in the last decades. This is our experience from the previous crisis. So the crisis hit the labor market very severely, but it took, the recovery was very, very slow and painful. So this actually brought us raised a very important question. If we continue to use the policies as usual, and there is always the risk of repeating this kind of mistake, meaning jobless growth or jobless recovery, or the employment overall or the world work benefit less or very slowly from the recovery process. So that's an important reminder. So our actually starting point for our analysis and also the policy responses to pandemic is that we shouldn't repeat that mistake which we made in the previous crisis. That's a very important starting point. So next slide, please. So then let me brief you about how actually the pandemic affected the workers. Probably a very important starting point is the restrictive measures which have been undertaken by many governments around the world to prevent the spread of the pandemic. The chart on the screen basically shows the change over time in the relative composition of the various actually government measures in response to the pandemic. So it actually put them all, it stacked them all together. The bottom part is more strict measures. It's basically nationwide lockdown measures. If you move up, that actually signifies a bit much lighter measures. And so if you can see the overall changes over time, you can clearly see there the very, very restrictive measures, lockdown measures, that actually shows at the bottom has been declining over time. But at the same time, overall speaking, even at the moment, more than 90% of the workers are living in countries where some sort of the restrictive measures are still in place in relation to the pandemic. Of course, which means, I mean, these most of the majority of workers at the moment are under or the subject to some kind of restrictive measures, which may influence our work activities or economic activities. I mean, I'm talking about the workers and enterprise at the same time. Very important change very recently is that if you look at the second part of it, which is basically required workplace closure for all but the essential workplaces, but it's not nationwide, but it's very targeted, either specific cities and specific locality. the proportion is still very high. It's more than actually 20 or 30%. This actually is reflecting the continued difficulties of the coping with the pandemic in many parts of the world, particularly in Asia, for example, India, and some the African countries, including South Africa, and also in many Latin American countries. As you know from newspaper very well, the countries are really, really struggling at the moment. So they all affect the extent to which actually the enterprises and workers are working at the moment. Next slide, please. And all of this situation is especially combined by the government actually measures, and along with the overall the contraction of the economy, they all made actually devastating impacts on the labor market. How can we capture those actually the labor market disruption in a most accurate and a reliable manner? That has been our question. You may wonder, I mean, if there is always the crisis and the labor market crisis sort, I mean, you say, okay, why don't we look at the unemployment? That is normally what we did before as well. As I mentioned, I mean, in the previous crisis, like a Great Recession, we always watch the changes in unemployment very carefully. This time it's different because first we look at the overall changes in unemployment, then we realize it only explains a very small part of the labor market disruption, because there are many different categories of the impact which may not be captured in unemployment. So for example, many workers are employed, still employed there. They are doing very short hours, for example. And also, some of them are still in employment. They are not working at all. So they are relying on some government support or some sort. And also there are many workers who they are basically on the sick leave as well. And these people are not captured in the typical unemployment figures. And also that's the worrisome trend from this during the pandemic. There are really serious increases and also even surge in the number of the inactive people. So basically many people just they gave up and then they just move out of the labor market. As you know very well, once the workers are moved out of the labor market, they stop the job search, then they are not considered as part of the active actually workforce. By definition, they are not part of the unemployment statistics. So the typical conventional unemployment statistics cannot capture them accurately. So for all of this reason, we decided to look at the working hours. We think that's the better measure of the labor market disruption during this kind of the crisis. So the chart, as you can see from the screen now, this presents the estimate of the working hour losses. This is the latest one, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we have issued the 6th edition of the IILO Monitor, but unfortunately, every time we always made upward adjustments to these working hour losses, meaning the situation is getting worse every time we actually update our estimate. This is the latest actual estimate. As you can see, in the first quarter, we are talking about less than the 6% of the working hour losses. But if you move to the second quarter, well, as you may remember very well, the pandemic hit the world simultaneously. The impact on the working hour losses is just unprecedented. We're talking about 17%. And the third quarter is slightly better, but not much. We're talking about the 12.1% of the working hour losses. You may wonder what this actually working hour losses mean. If we actually convert these working hour losses in the full-time jobs, I mean, let's assume each full-time job is working 48 hours per week. So the second quarter working hour losses, 17.3%, is basically amounts to the 500 million full-time jobs. Let me repeat, 500 million full-time jobs. You may say, wow, how can it be possible? Yeah, it is true. So for example, even tourism sector alone, many experts are saying the overall globally at the moment, about 50 million jobs have been lost. So this is really huge numbers and very unprecedented. It's not comparable. I mean, it's probably probably one of the close comparison would be Great Recession in the 1920s and 30s, 1930s basically. So it's a very, very huge impact and unprecedented. It's massive and also devastating. The figure for the Philippines, I didn't put the number for Philippines on my slide. But as you know, in the second quarter in the Philippines, GDP declined, as far as I remember correctly, by 16.5%. And then third quarter, there is a bit of expectation, so GDP will decline further by in the range of the 6 to 8%. So this huge actually changes. And that is reflected in our estimate of the working hour losses for the Philippines. We basically thinking our estimate is basically for the second quarter, working hour loss will be more than 30% in the Philippines. And the third quarter, we are thinking of around the 20%. So it's really massive. This scale of the working hour losses is a bit comparable to some Latin American countries and also some other Asian countries. So it's a huge impact. Next slide, please. So what is then the future looks like, because it's very hard to know what will happen in even the next actually 3 months, and because the situation has been evolving all the time, and all the labor market outcomes and disruption very much depends on how the pandemic is evolving, and at the same time, probably also importantly, how the governments are responding to the pandemic. And also there are lots of the economic factors as well. For that reason, as I mentioned before, we continue to update our estimate, and the situation is changing very rapidly. So what we can do at this moment is we are monitoring the situation very carefully. We are trying to update our estimate and analysis as often as possible. And then also we're trying to be very transparent about the data and how we estimate them. So if we look at our IILO Monitor for the last 6 edition, probably main analysis is about the very short, relatively the 14 or 15 pages. And then we normally have the equally long, actually the appendix actually is normally about the 15 and 20 pages to explain data sources and the estimation method. Okay, so this is a way of responding the high uncertainty of our estimate at the moment, and that's basically reflecting high uncertainty of the future. Nonetheless, I mean, there is a strong interest in, especially among the policymakers and also enterprises and workers. What will be the possible scenario for the labor market in the coming months and beyond? For that reason, actually, we do a bit of the projection for the fourth quarter of this year. Actually, we first did that in the 5th edition, so a couple of months ago. And since that, we're talking just 2 months, the situation actually gone badly. So we had to revisit our actually projection, and then we estimate the possible range of the labor market development in the coming 3 months. On the screen, you can see the chart, and so basically Q1 and Q2, Q3 is just I just actually present the global numbers to you. So the important part of this the chart is on the last part, the fourth quarter. We have the three scenario at the moment. One is a baseline scenario, an optimistic scenario, and pessimistic scenario. Baseline scenario is basically building on the global projection at the moment by OECD and Economics Intelligence Unit and other international organizations about GDP. So we are using GDP projection as the basis for a projection. According to that scenario, we are now thinking of the around the 8 or 9% of the working hour losses, which is the slight improvement compared to the second quarter and third quarter, but it's still which means we still having very significant the labor market disruption. And then even the optimistic scenario is basically it's very optimistic, I must say, because we are assuming that the jobs are recovering much faster than economic growth. So as I told you in the very beginning, one of the important feature of the previous crisis, like Great Recession, employment and labor income recovered much more slowly than economic growth itself. So we are making the opposite actually assumption, the opposite to the what has happened before. So in that sense, it's very optimistic. Even in that optimistic scenario, we are still talking about the 6% of the working hour losses. But now, what about the pessimistic scenario? Pessimistic scenario is basically assuming another wave of the pandemic, as we have seen in the second quarter. In this scenario, the working hour losses will be back to the level of the working hour losses in the second quarter. So it's a very pessimistic. But at the moment, the many countries are really still struggling. And then also even some European countries and also some African and some Latin American countries are considering reintroduction of some of the restrictive measures at the moment. So it's very pessimistic, but we cannot exclude at the moment the possibility of some sort of the second wave or even third wave of the pandemic in many parts of the world. And also, I'm afraid if you ask me about what is the most realistic scenario for the fourth quarter, I must say the optimistic scenario is too optimistic at the moment. So the actual situation will be somewhere between the baseline and pessimistic scenario. That is the best guess we can make at this moment. Next slide, please. And then let me quickly go through, I don't know, time-wise, I'm doing okay. So Patty, how much time do I have?
Please go on, Sangheon. We have a lot of time ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Patty. So so far I actually talk about some of the broader pictures, and then as you can imagine, in this scale of the labor market disruption, nobody is actually free from this disruption. Every companies, every workers are affected. But still, there are some groups of workers and some sectors and some types of enterprise are hit harder compared to the other groups. So I just want to focus on this hard hit groups very quickly, but there are many, but I just want to highlight the situation for three particular category of the workers. First one is the informal workers. Second is the young people and youth employment. Third is women. Very briefly, informal workers, as you can imagine, this pandemic is just a disaster for our workers and enterprises, particularly those in the informal sector. The one of the very distinctive, probably I must say defining feature of this pandemic when it comes to labor market disruption is that the usual scenario about the informal work is not happening. For example, normally in a typical economic crisis or typical even the labor market crisis, the workers, especially in the developing countries, workers, even if they actually somehow lost their jobs in their factories or in the shops, still they tend to rely on some sort of informal work, like street vendors or something similar, as a bit of survival strategy during the crisis. So one of the puzzle all the time is that during the economic crisis in some developing countries, especially low-income countries, the unemployment is not increasing because the people are very quick to shift from some formal or some jobs to the informal activities. So that's why the correlation between unemployment and economic crisis is not very strong in many countries because of this the role of the informal work as the survival strategy. Now, this pandemic is different because all the restrictive measures actually relating to the pandemic, basically meaning the people's mobilities are constrained, and sometimes really severely constrained. And this also means the informal activities is not an option either because the people cannot go out to the street, for example, to do some economic activities to earn some income. So in other words, the informal work actually is not stopping the survival strategy for many workers during this pandemic. So this is a very important aspect. This means this crisis, this job crisis, affects the informal workers more than ever, more than in any crisis. So in our estimation, in the very first couple of days, the very first month of these measures relating to the pandemic, like restrictive measures, we basically estimate around 60% of the income will be gone for this sector informal workers. So income loss will be in the scale of the 60%. That's average. In some parts of the world, it's up to the 80%. That's heavy income loss. So which means for those people without any support from relative and government and communities, I mean, without any extra income support, they simply cannot survive. Relate to that is that because of the situation, we expect pandemic will eventually increase inequality between workers and also overall income inequality. I mean, I don't need to explain why this is happening. So we are very much worried about the situation in the informal workers. So that's why we are calling for the immediate income and also even job support for the informal workers and also supporting the informal enterprises, the SMEs, etc. Next slide, please. Young people. Whenever we have a crisis, we always talking about young people. Young people are suffering most, and so we have to do something. This is a little user story. That's why we are always saying one of the best actually policies on the youth employment is based to prevent the crisis itself, because the crisis normally affects young people so severely. But again, this time there is just some important difference compared to the previous crisis. Of course, young people were hit hard by the crisis, but because the job opportunities are declining. So even though they have the best possible qualification and from the good universities or good colleges and good actual high schools, still they couldn't get a job. So this was typically labor demand shock. But another aspect of the crisis for the young people is that it's a very severe labor supply shock as well. This is a very unique feature. In our analysis, for example, during the lockdown, and the situation is pretty much the same even now. Young people are really having hard times to continue their education. And when it comes to the work-based learning or more training, specific skill, the situation is much worse. We did a survey with the all TVET institution globally, and then one of the very striking finding was that the more than 90% of the TVET institution actually they closed down their actually regular training courses. And many of them, of course, shift to the some online and remote learning. But in many parts of the world, I mean, as you can imagine, the quality of the online learning is a bit of the problematic. Although they are they are doing their best to get to improve the quality, simply infrastructure and resources are not there. And then also the young people are very much worried about their future in two ways. One is they're not quite sure they will be able to finalize or finish their education, and they get the training completed, and they get the relevant certificate. So that is big. According to our recent survey, they're very much worried about that. And at the same time, the young people already lost job. Actually, we think one out of six young people, they stopped working since the pandemic. So this is a very, very difficult situation. So it will be more and more difficult for the young people to enter the labor market. It's difficult already. Even though they enter the labor market, the quality of job may not be very good. And so that's the reality. At the same time, we know from the previous crisis, and there are lots of the analysis on this. We know the young people who somehow couldn't manage to get into the labor market within a very short period after graduation, and they couldn't manage to get the good jobs. But this a bit of the unsuccessful experience at the very early stage of the labor market, they have a long-lasting impact on the rest of their working life. So their employment opportunities and the risk of unemployment and also labor earning. If you look at all of this, they normally, on average, they will not able to catch up with the or other comparable young people who actually did manage to get a good job at a very early stage. So there are lots of studies in the advanced country, in developing countries, the gap between successful and unsuccessful young people at the very early stage of labor market, the gap between them never narrowed down over the life cycle. So that's what we call the scaling effect. But this scaling effect is mainly related to the labor demand. That is typical analysis. But now, as I mentioned, we have the combined shock right now, demand and supply shock. So that's why there is a very high risk of the scaling effect for the young people during the pandemic. So we are very much worried about the risk of the lockdown generation. So we coined the term the lockdown generation. This is enough for actually some of the journalistic sensationalism, and we are very much worried about the risk of the lockdown generation. In my country, in Korea, we had such a generation. We call it IMF generation. Those generation actually got a very difficult time during the financial shock, but they never recovered. I mean, that is a very short-lived crisis, but it has a very strong, long-lasting effect. Okay, next slide, please. And women, just briefly, we are also worried about women because if you look at all the data, so far we look at the data overall confirms the women are hit harder than men. That's very common pattern in terms of employment opportunities. There are many reasons for them. One of them is the sector hit very hard by the crisis. They happens to have the more women than men. So like many sectors, for example, some service-related sectors, which were hit very hard by the crisis. Women are overrepresented. So in relative terms, the women are more vulnerable to the economic shock at the moment. But there is another aspect as well. So the domestic workers as well. So domestic workers were hit very hard. Another one is during the lockdown measures, we clearly see the trend that the women are taking more burden of care, child care, elder care, or other types of care, because the children has to stay home, and so the existing inequality in the division of the care work within the household, within the family, has got worse. So which actually somehow impact the women's in terms of the scope and also the intensity of the labor market participation, and also the work itself. It's coming up very strongly in many places. So this actually factor together. So the labor demand side and also care related burden taken by women somehow put the women in a very difficult situation. Our worry is that basically for last 20 years or so, we managed to achieve some modest actually gain in terms of gender equality in the labor market. We made a progress, but it was modest in my view. But even this modest actually achievement in terms of gender equality may be wiped out again, unless there is some good policy measures in place. Okay, next slide, please. So then I just gave some all bad news so far, so I feel really guilty about this. So even my director general is always joking, and that I'm kind of the messenger of the open news. So I'm quite get used to it. But one good news is that the overall governments have been responding to this pandemic relatively quickly and with a large scalable resources, and probably it may not be enough, and the delivery mechanism is not good, and so there are some countries are not doing very good compared to the others, but I'm talking about globally speaking. So this is actually government actually response, especially stimulus, actually fiscal stimulus help a lot. So we look at how much actually this actually government responses, particularly stimulus, fiscal stimulus, helped in the mitigating labor market disruption. Our finding is that the 1% in terms of if you look at the fiscal stimulus as a proportion of GDP, 1% increase in the fiscal stimulus actually leads to the reduction in working hour losses by 0.8 percentage points. So it's quite a significant, very large effect. So that's good news. Next slide, please. But this actually stimulus is distributed unevenly between the countries. Which countries? They are doing lots of things. They pull all the resources to respond to the crisis. But when you move out of this, the advanced country, especially we are going to middle or low income countries, situation is very dire. And even though the government wants to do more and better, but their fiscal space is very limited for many, many reasons, including the accumulated, the foreign debt, and all of these issues. So there has been some concern about the situation, especially the labor market impacts of the pandemic are getting greater and more severe in the middle and low income countries. These countries are really more active and more resource-based intervention, but the situation is not easy. So while we actually look at how difficult the situation is in these countries, what we did is we compare the fiscal stimulus to the actual the labor market disruption in terms of working hour losses. So we compare the two. So we did is that how much actual resources the low income or the middle income countries would need to reach the level of the fiscal stimulus relative to the labor market disruption. Our finding is that basically in the high income country, you can see some kind of one-to-one actually pair. But when you move down to the developing countries, it's around the 30%, not one-to-one, 30%. But when it comes to income country, it's just 10%. So in our calculation, a bit of the stimulus gap in that respect is around the 930, I think it's around the 982 billion US dollars. It's big money. And when it comes to low income countries, it's around 45 billion US dollars. It's big money, we know that. But 45 billion US dollar is only 1% of the total fiscal stimulus in advanced countries. So in that respect, we think there is still some room for the global support for the middle and low income countries, basically helping them in mobilizing their fiscal resources and to respond to this actually unprecedented scale of the labor market disruption. Next slide, please. Let's quickly move on some of the policy issues. And all this analysis, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we did all kind of number crunching and paying for the estimation work, not just because for fun, actually. This is because we want to convey our strong policy message very clearly. We really want to see the countries are doing more and better for job rich and also inclusive recovery. So jobs should be at the center of our responses and recovery policies. So that's why from the very beginning, the early March, we proposed the 4 policy framework for the job rich inclusive recovery. First one is actually, first and foremost, I mean, it's very important to continue to stimulate the economy, the employment. That's why it is about how to boost the labor demand. That's why we always emphasize the importance of active fiscal policies and macro policies, and also a strong support to some specific sectors and health sectors, and also the sectors hit hard by the pandemic. The second policy pillar is about even though we have the good actual macro support, but we need a very specific policy measures to support the enterprises and the workers and for jobs and the income. For that, we are thinking of the whole range of the policy measures here, like social protection. I don't need to explain how important it is. And also the job retention measures or measures actually maintaining jobs at the workplace. And also to make it happen, it's very important to provide very strong and very effective financial and tax incentive or other relief for the enterprises. Especially SMEs are in a very difficult situation. So we're always asking the countries to pay more attention about the financial situation for SMEs. I mean, that's where most of the jobs are created in many parts of the world. And the third one is, protecting workers in the workplace is very, very important. Unless you have good actual measures in place, the workers may be reluctant to come back to workplace, and even the employers and enterprises are very difficult to organize their production as effective, as efficient as before. And pillar 4 is that one of the big lessons from the previous crisis is that every country is different, every time is different. Policy responses should be different. How can we develop such policies? There are many ways. We need a good analysis and the good actually policy visions. But after all of this, we need a very strong social dialogue actually for the solution. We know the enterprise know their situation far better than anybody else, and the workers also know their situation far better than others. So if the governments and workers and employers get together to see the whole range of the policy options and to make a decision which one is working best, and also how we can work together to implement those policies. Next slide, please. This is my final slide. Countries are acting very hard. I mean, just highlight a couple of things here, especially protecting jobs and income and how to create jobs. I mean, that is, these issues are echoed in the report. Actually, the Patty introduced in the beginning of the webinar. There are lots of things. I mean, probably I would be happy to respond to any questions about this. And there are really serious policy measures actually to protect jobs and income, especially through the enterprises. And so, I mean, Germany, Korea, and many even the countries, including China and others, and they all introduce short hours. And of course, short hours mean, I mean, there's an income shortfall that is normally, to some extent, compensated by the government subsidies. And there are wage subsidies. I mean, the whole range of that, and from different funding sources and different programs. And Argentina, I mean, Argentina has a really hard time at the moment, but they do manage to use this emergency labor and productivity assistance program. This is actually helping workers and enterprises in actually maintaining the job while continuing the production. Even Russia and Serbia and other countries around there, they have a very strong program for subsidies to, especially targeted at SMEs. And South Africa, again, another country is hit very hard by the pandemic. They do have a temporary employers relief schemes. Actually, that's a bit of channeling the money to help workers and enterprises, even the training activities. That is through the mainly the unemployment insurance fund. So it's one good example of the tagging in the social protection fund to extend the support to the labor market. Now, many countries are now in a sort of recovery process. Not all the countries, but quite many yet. They are thinking of the ways of creating jobs. The one obvious example is investing in employment-intensive risk infrastructure and also environmental-friendly sectors. China is mobilizing huge money now in these types of investment. And also there are lots of investment in care and health. I mean, everybody agree we need more investment in there. That actually investment in infrastructure and also at the same time the investing people and skills, and we need more skilled people there as well. And also social service sectors and these sectors. So they are all the important source of the future job creation. So we know even before the pandemic, these are the leading sectors in terms of the source of the decent job creation. Here's the example. There are many examples from my country, Korea, but I just mentioned this, but there are many other countries in Europe and in Africa, in many Asian countries at the moment. So there are lots of good examples which are inspiring and working quite well. But at the same time, the sheer magnitude of labor market disruption is just so big at the moment. So still, even in this country with a good example, they are still struggling to find the best solutions to the very unprecedented labor market disruption. So with that, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Actually, I spoke way too long, and so I hope it was clear. But I'm happy to discuss with you or further on any questions and clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lee. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alvin Curada. I'll be co-moderating today's webinar. As promised, we would like to show the results of the poll questions. And as we do, Director Lee would like to request your inputs, insights, or reactions to the responses and perceptions of our participants to the poll question. Can we pull up the results of the first poll question, please? Most of our participants are from the manufacturing sector, construction, wholesale and retail trade, accommodation and food service, and a small portion came from the IT, the financial services, and the health and social work services. And a small portion also of our participants are from the agriculture sector. So that's the profile, Director Lee, of our participants for today's webinar. For a second poll question, we ask our participants on measures undertaken by their companies during the pandemic. And 7 out of 10 of our participants mentioned that they resorted to working from home, and around 50% reduced the number of working days per week. They also reduced number of work hours per day, and a small portion temporarily reduced employment and permanently laid off employees. Director Lee, is this trend similar also to other ASEAN countries or some other countries outside of ASEAN?
I think this is very similar actually. I think yeah, overall, I mean, this normally we do surveys, especially with the enterprises. I mean, the highest kind of the most frequent the method of the response is the adjusting working hours, and so that's, and also the utilizing the teleworking as much as possible, but it's not obviously not applicable to all enterprises and all workers, but whenever possible, this is the important method. And it's very interesting to note, I mean, the relatively speaking, the permanent layoff and also temporary layoff are, relatively speaking, seems to be a bit low compared to the other countries.
Thank you, Director Lee. In the recent edition of the IILO Monitor on COVID-19 and the World of Work, the 6th edition issued last September 23, IILO proposes, among others, policy interventions that would respond to labor market disruptions, as well as full support to vulnerable workers. Hence, we asked Director Lee in our third poll question, what is the most important urgent assistance that our participants need from the government today? Most of them need financial assistance, credit window from the government. Others also might request tax waivers or temporary tax breaks. And 2 out of 10, around 2 out of 10 of our participants responded unemployment insurance for workers, while a small percentage responded rent subsidies and cash transfers. Your thoughts, please, Director Lee.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I think this actually, I think this is partly reflecting the fact the main actually responses to these questions are, I think, is there are companies, and then I understand. Normally, if we do some general survey with the larger population, like a household style of the survey, you can see a sort of equal emphasis on the unemployment insurance and cash transfer, and at the same time, the financial assistance. But I mean, this actually results reflecting of a bit of the composition of the webinar today. But I think the survey actually reveals, the poll actually reveals a very important point, the importance of the financial assistance and also tax actually break. Probably the response maybe depends on the what kind of situation the companies are in. Even though some countries may benefit from the tax waive and tax break, but in many cases, I mean, the magnitude of the support through this actually tax break system may not be large. So many other companies, especially SMEs, may not be enough. I mean, this actually, the tax break may not be enough to them, especially in going through this difficult time. That's why many actually refers to the importance of the financial assistance, the credit right away. I think this is a very the common pattern which actually emerges in other countries as well. Especially SMEs, I mean, they are sometimes having very severe liquidity crisis. That's because of all of the demand is collapsing, So they have normally temporary, actually, the liquidity crisis, I mean, which with some financial support, they can survive. But at the moment, the company is having a bit of difficulties to have access to the credit at the moment. So I think this is a very important policy, in my view. And probably most important is that this is not a bit of choice of the choice over the two options. Mm-hmm. In my view, I mean, the governments need to develop a bit of the package of policies which can be tailored to the different situation of the companies. As I mentioned, some companies may appreciate tax break more than anything else, and others may appreciate the financial assistance more than others. So if you have the whole package of the policy is support, then the companies can choose over that to, in a way of the maximizing the government support for the benefit of the companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you may notice, Director Lee, our Q&A and chat boxes are packed with questions. And we also have comments from our Facebook Live section because we're live stream on Facebook. But as part of moderators, one of moderators' privileges, I get to ask the first question.
Yes, please.
We observe that countries seem to be racing to provide unprecedented measures and intervention, as mentioned by Ms. Patty earlier, in terms of social protection systems to mitigate the impact of COVID, and in terms of active labor market programs to cushion the impact of income losses and protecting existing jobs and facilitating employment. It is also said that the pandemic has revealed gaps in social protection system in terms of coverage, adequacy, and comprehensiveness. Can you say the same for existing labor markets? Meaning, has the pandemic created an opportunity for governments to make their active labor market programs more shock responsive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's certainly, that's for sure. Actually, many countries are seeing this as the opportunity and challenging opportunities to scale up the existing social protection, especially the expand the coverage to the informal workers. As I mentioned, the informal workers are severely hit, and many of them are not benefiting from the social protection. Of course, there are lots of discussion about the universal basic income or different sorts of the idea at the moment, but the countries are at the moment more interested in the using the existing social protection mechanism, scale them up to extend the coverage. This is certainly the direction actually Philippines is now taking as well. So, so you're very much in a kind of very much well actually synchronized, if you like, with the other countries. The same for active labor market policies. We can see the very stronger interest in that. The challenge now is two-front here. When it comes to active labor market policies, it's important. Active labor market policy, one of the key elements is to provide the workers opportunity to learn for upskilling or reskilling, or getting some training opportunities. There are two issues right now because of the already restrictive measures and also the distancing, etc. Countries to struggle a little bit to organize actually training in a conventional way. I mean, conventional training these workers. So that is a bit of the organizational challenges. Second is that this is something I really want to see more, but I think it's happening now. We put lots of money for the job retention program. So we're giving some money to the enterprises or even to workers because they are working shorter hours. But one idea would be, why don't we combine those actually subsidy programs with the training opportunities? So the workers may actually work a much shorter hours. Sometimes they may not work because they can only work in the workplace. In that case, we can provide opportunity for workers to learn the use set of the skills. And so combining active labor market policy elements with the job retention program or subsidy program, there will be a way of the somehow strengthening actually the active employment policies.
Thank you, Director Lee. Miss Patty, do you have questions for Director Lee?
Yes, thank you, Attorney Alvin. Hello again, Sangheon. I have some reservations asking this question, but it is in the Q&A, Sangheon. And
Yeah.
the question goes, sir, you mentioned in the pre-pandemic experience of labor income lagging behind economic growth and productivity. If we are to avoid the same mistake, as you said earlier, moving forward after the pandemic, do you think a statutory minimum wage will help reduce the widening inequality? This is like deja vu, Sangheon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's quite a complex and difficult and sensitive question. I know. In my view, there are many reasons why actually the gaps between labor productivities and wage. There are so many reasons for that, and how to managing actually minimum wages better will be one of the many possible solutions to this actually important actually policy challenges. Then let me get back to that in a minute. And before that, labor productivity wage. I put it in average term. Another very important dimension you have to remember is the twofold. One is there are many reasons for the a bit of the vicious circle between labor productivity and wages, because the workers sometimes actually paid less than they deserve, for example, or they hope, and that has a very strong demotivation effect as well. So the one of the serious actually the productivity slowdown is normally coming from the service sectors. So service sector, there are all new types of the contract arrangement in or gig economy, whatever. These actually the workers in a rather precarious condition, their productivity is not very high, so they are a bit dragging down the overall productivity as well. So there is a bit of a different, and the causality is working. But more importantly, if you look at the labor productivities and between enterprises, it's the completely different stories. You can see the gaps between labor productivity and wages, yes, but if you look at the labor productivity between enterprises, it's growing as well. So what I'm saying is you see the very high front companies with very high productivities, they are leading productivity growth. But there are many actually sectors and enterprises who are lagging behind, who cannot benefit from the innovation and new technology, etc. So I think that's very important. We need to work on this to make sure the all enterprises can benefit from this actually the productivity, new technology, and etc. Otherwise, the companies in a very low productivity situation, they cannot simply afford actually giving the higher wages, because they have very strong productivity constraint. Unless we can find a way of helping these enterprises and workers to get out of this sector productivity trap, it's very hard to see we can narrow the gap in any time very future. And minimum wages, already minimum wage is always helpful in reducing the wage inequality and also the increasing the wage floor for workers. I strongly believe it. That's very important part of policies. But again, ideally, this can go along with all the measures, as I mentioned, about the enterprises.
Okay. Thank you, Sangyeon. There's another question here from your friend, Chacha Satumba. Director Cha Satumba. Chacha.
Chacha, yeah, I know.
And she asked me to ask you this. There are pending and I think you already answered this a while ago, but just to be sure, there are pending proposals for the implementation of a wage subsidy in the Philippines to enable businesses to continue operations and retain workers. What considerations or parameters should we look into in adopting a wage subsidy program? I think that's
wow, yeah, I don't know, Philippine, these are very sensitive questions politically in many parts of the countries. Um, Let me say two things. I mean, in this particular moment, actually, still wage subsidies are very important. Many people say, well, okay, why don't you find a new job opportunity for them? I mean, that is one of the very difficult response. But in this kind of situation where labor demand is collapsing, I mean, that's not really the option. So ideally, that would be great. We can find some solution for them outside of the current job, but this is not something we can afford at the moment. The wage subsidy, I mean, there are two aspects. One is wage subsidies are normally working quite well, but it really depends on how you implement them, as Patty, you and then Chacha mentioned. One issue is that the performance of these actual wage subsidies in terms of the keeping the actual job, sometimes a bit disappointing. So the companies actually companies who, for example, have the abilities to keep these workers, but they actually benefit from the wage subsidy. So these companies may not need this subsidy, but they can benefit from them. So we call it the adverse selection. That is a risk of that. And another risk is that this wage subsidy is sometimes short-lived. I mean, the companies are keeping these workers only when actually they are receiving subsidies, and as soon as this program ends, and then they immediately make adjustments to the workforce. So it's very short-lived in a sense. And so overperformance is short-lived. I mean, there is always issue of the implementation and the monitoring and etc. That is a common challenge. I mean, for the wage subsidy. By very design, wage subsidy have some cost aspect. That's inevitable. I mean, that's something we have to live with. All we can do is to find a way of reducing that part of it. And then for workers' side, that's important issues for workers. We have to accept right now the fact that some of these workers may not continue to stay in the current job, even after pandemic, and irrespective of this wage subsidy program. Let's say if we continue this situation for 1 year, I'm pretty sure this situation pretty much with us at least the end of the year, probably well into next year as well. So the workers in that situation, in a on and off basis for 1 year and more, then the future of their job is pretty much at risk. So we know that. Yeah? So what can we do for these workers? That is an important question. This is a very difficult question, but we have to already start to think about. I think in my view, this is the point I mentioned to the Arvin's actual question. We have to, in my view, it's important to keep helping workers to keep the current job, but at the same time, we already factor in the new opportunities for training or new skills already now, and then basically helping them prepared for the new job opportunity when actually they arise. So my suggestion would be, I mean, that is something you have already in mind, to combining this actually more active labor market policy already into the job retention program. That is a way of bringing short-term responses and long-term actual perspective together. Mm-hmm. Then also that is a little provide a good basis for sustainable job actual wage recovery in the coming months and coming years.
Thank you, Sangheon. I think these are very useful inputs for chat. I think this is a direction for research work. And now my chance to ask my own question. Earlier, Sangheon, you said, like you made mention about the estimated number of working hours lost in the Philippines. And may I just, for the second and the third quarters, but I think I did not hear you say what were the sources of working hours lost in the Philippines. Were they because of, there were four, I remember there are 3 or 4 sources of working hours lost. It's either you are employed but not working, etc. So for the Philippines, what is the major source of working hours lost, if you have data on this?
I think I don't have the specific data with me now because they are in the office. I'm now home actually. So, but I can tell you here. Um, I don't know exact proportion, but to the best, to my best recollection, in the Philippines, especially in the second quarter, the one significant part of this working hour losses has much to do with the underemployment. I think I also remember from the July labor force statistics from Philippines. It's July or I don't know, latest is June or July, but it's not very clear to me. And I also remember there is quite a significant increases in the underemployment as well. And also the inactivities. I remember again, I'm not sure about the proportion, but the really significant proportion of the people are basically dropped out of the labor market, inactive. There are quite a number of them. Of course, in the Philippines, the unemployment is also quite sensitive. I mean, compared to other countries, I'm a bit surprised actually. Unemployment is increasing very rapidly compared to the other countries, and unemployment itself is not increasing much. I mean, you can see more changes in the underemployment and also inactivities, but the Philippines, in the case of unemployment, is moving more sensitively. That's what I remember, but overall, because all this actually the sensitive responses on the inactivities and also the underemployment, that actually explained quite I think more than 50% of the working hour losses. That's how I remember. I can double check and get back to you.
Thank you very much, Sangheon. Back to you, Attorney Alvin.
Thank you, Director Lee. We're also joined by our previous resource persons. Hideki is here. Dr. Paringit also is here. So I would like to ask you the question on from the lecture of Mr. Hideki. Last week, Hideki mentioned that technological advancement, demographic shifts, and climate change are said to affect future work. How will the pandemic affect these factors as it influence the future of work? Meaning, will it create positive or negative effects on the future of work?
There are many ways of looking at that. I mean, this is quite a big issues. What I want to say at this moment is that one of the good lessons or the striking feature of this pandemic is that all discussion we have about the future of work, and when we are discussing them, we basically spot what are our weakest points of our current system. So that is all about our discussion about the future world. Those actually weak points or weakest link came up very, very clearly and painfully during the pandemic. For example, technology. We said, one of the big agenda about the future world on technology is that everybody should benefit from technology. But during the pandemic, it's very clear there is a clear digital divide. There are people who can benefit from the new technology, and then who can do teleworking, for example. But there are the other groups who cannot actually do that, and they are completely excluded from the technology. Of course, those people are always at risk compared to the others, to the virus, at the same time to difficult the labor market situation. And it's the same for the environment. Now, on the environment, we didn't do very good job in the environment-related investment, the pandemic. Now, we realize, I mean, if we have this actually investment already well in place in now, then they may actually provide a good opportunity for the creating and maintaining jobs, and through channeling some further investment. So we missed that opportunity. But that's a bit of a negative way of looking at. A positive way of looking at it is that well, this whole pandemic simply reinforced the importance of our debate on the future world. So it's now, it's not really a matter of choice. It's imperative now to work out the new or new actually social economic system in which, I mean, you can address all these actually future work related challenges at the same time building in, I mean, resilience, I mean, ourselves through this. And then when we have, I hope not, but actually if we have the similar the challenges like this pandemic, we can be better placed to respond to it.
Thank you, Director Lee. Miss Patty, I saw two interesting questions, one from Executive Director C and one from Hideki.
Yeah. Oh, Hideki has a question. Sige. I will ask the question from Director Chris, which we met during our meeting. Yeah. So she goes, moving forward to the new normal, what in your opinion should be the industries where wage subsidy and financial assistance for MSMEs should be concentrated for purposes of a multiplier effect and to hasten more economic activities? We are, yeah, this again, this is about...
This is, again, difficult questions. I think there is no easy answer to that because each countries have a different structure of the economy and sector composition, and also the relative importance, especially strategic importance of these sectors may differ from one country to another. So I cannot single out the one particular sectors for some of the priority and focus area. But in principle, absolutely, you're right. I mean, when you are making decision on the wage subsidies, especially when you have very limited resources, of course, you have to evaluate it. I mean, strategic importance. I mean, not just short term and the long term, and also considering the potential of those sectors, you know, in terms of the continuing to create decent jobs in a very sustainable way. I mean, so sustainability is one important element we have to consider.
Okay, thank you. And I remember, Sangheon, you saying a while ago that whatever little progress we accomplished over the short period of time, they were obliterated because of this pandemic. Yes, and are you saying that we now are challenged with so much decent work deficits? Countries are facing it. Yeah. And so,
so Patty, yes, I mean, this is a bit of the confession from my end. Yeah. In as early as March and even the April, we thought the tourism is the very important sector. I would say wage subsidies, I mean, should be really focused on these tourism sectors. But now, there is some now the prediction that the tourism industry will recover in the end, but may not get back to the level we have seen before. So this is a bit of, so the listening or the reading all this analysis, I wonder my earlier perception about this tourism in terms of the future job creation and strategic importance may not be as relevant. So this is basically have much to do with the evolving nature of the pandemic. So at least, I mean, many people expected in March, I mean, at least the tourism sector may get back to the normal level pretty soon by now. But we were all wrong about that. So this is very difficult. So all I can suggest is there is no single easy answer to any question, and also there is no enshrined principles. All we can do is we look at the situation very carefully and analyzing them, and we always continue to adjust our policies accordingly. That is the best shot we have.
I agree with you, Sangheon, because even if economies, the Philippine economy, markets are starting to open up, the public, like me, we're still very much hesitant to engage. Nobody wants to go out. The malls are empty. I think this is one of the assumptions that should figure in when we do our forecasts. Another thing is, even if you create employment again for the unemployed, you hire these people, the money will not immediately translate into incomes for them. Many will go into paying debts and paying, you know. So really take a long time before we can realize or see full recovery.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, going back to what you said about the tourism industry, are you saying the same for the other industries with very high contact facing elements? Are, yeah, like wholesale retail trade, other industries with very high contact facing elements or aspects of the job? Would you say the
Yeah.
same?
I wouldn't say the same things for the forestry, the others, and there is a bit of different elements. For example, more agriculture. For me, agriculture and forestry, and some rural-based sectors. I mean, we need to revisit these sectors in light of the pandemic, and also there is some concern about the global supply chain, especially the food supply chain and food security. All of these issues came out very strongly during the pandemic. And also we look at those issues from the environment issues and green job issues, etc. So I mean, in a sense, I mean, each sector has its own things. I mean, so we actually look at those situations very carefully, taking into account not just about the pandemic. We can actually, it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to extend our time horizon, but I think for policymakers and also enterprises, and many of the participants of this webinar are the managing enterprises. I mean, it's important for us to, as much as possible, to extend our time horizon a little bit, and what we can do with a view to what might happening in next year or beyond. I mean, that's the important job for us.
Thank you. Back to you, Attorney Alvin.
Ms. Pate, I would like to ask Hideki's question. Hideki mentioned that you have a very extensive knowledge on South Korea's response to the pandemic. So he wanted to know now, overview of view on the dual success of South Korea in containing the pandemic early and at the same time preserving jobs. Is Korea's response relevant and maybe adapted to some other countries?
Because I put some Korean example. I thought, I mean, our colleagues in Philippines seems to be interested in Korean experience. That's all. I'm not putting that because I'm patriot. So, I mean, it's not about Korea. I mean, whenever we look at the data, one very clear pattern is that the countries who managed to do good job in actually restraining the pandemic, the labor market outcome are relatively good. So that's why actually probably the best health policy is the best economic the labor market policy. I think that is what actually data tells us. So I mean, if you look at what happens in the U.S. and the Latin America, in Africa and India, it's very telling. Now the India, for example, GDP declined by the 25% in the second quarter. So it's a massive shock, for example. But having said that, even if you do have the similar level of success of the restraining or preventing the pandemic, labor performance differs a bit between the countries as well. That's where the role of labor market policy is a good design of the retention program, for example, it's very, very important. The one of the measure actually the government introduced is the income support, basically giving all the money, like $500 to every citizen in the country, for example. But this is an important examples, and along with all the job retention program, but Korea has their own infrastructure. For example, the income support, the cash transfer, the Korean government did not give it in cash. They gave the credit card or others, and also there is expiry date. Unless you spend them all until certain date, it will be all gone. Mm-hmm. So all these actually tighter measures and with some good actually disciplinary and monitoring elements in it, then all this actually cash, eventually all this money goes to the small restaurants and food, and where all the self-employed and SMEs are really concentrated. So we see the very strong impact of this actual program in actually boosting the consumption and also demand on these sectors. So I don't think the other country may not have that kind of infrastructure in place. So that's a bit of the small of the caution. I'm not sure, Hideki, I responded to your question, but we can have a separate discussion about that.
Thank you, Hideki, for asking that question. You mentioned already previously, Director Lee, wage inequality, but I would like to push the issue further. Coming from an organization whose primary mandate is minimum wage fixing and determination, we are the NWPC, as you know. What has been the extent and magnitude of the impact of the pandemic on wages, given the severe and perhaps one of the worst record of unemployment and, as Ms. Patty mentioned earlier, decline in working hours to date? Will we again see a renewed interest, or will there be a mounting pressure on the minimum wage institution or minimum wage as a social protection tool?
There are two things, because the IILO is now working on the global wage report, so which will come out sometime in December. The report will touch upon that issue. That's my understanding. This is really a difficult question. We have been, so far in my analysis, always looking at the working hour losses. Haven't looked at the what happens to wages for those who actually keep the job. Right. So for example, what happens to the hourly wages, for example? We know there is some big changes there, but we don't have the data yet to confirm that. But still, I'm a bit worried about that, a bit of the inequality aspect of it already, because one of the irony of this pandemic is that if we look at the labor productivity figure very recently for the first and second quarter, many people expect the labor productivity has been declining. This is pandemic economic crisis. But actually, you look at the data, the average labor productivity has been increasing. That's not because all of us are all of a sudden more productive. That's not what happened. This is pure composition effect. The people with the high skill and paid well, they actually are more likely to keep the job. People in low paid, in a difficult contract situation, they are facing with all kinds of job losses and unemployment and etc. So if you think about those actually low-paid jobs all will be gone and disappear, and all the well-paid productive jobs actually survive, then if we have the average and then you have the very illusionary increase in the average labor productivity. So my point is that we see, because of this actually the disproportionate or the differential impact on the job between the workers, we expect quite a bit of changes in the wage inequality as well. Our guess is the wage inequality has been definitely increasing. And another aspect to that is that's why, if that is true, the role of these minimum wages, as the NWPC is doing, is very important. But of course, we have to revisit how we can set the minimum wages in the new context. It's important, but that the whole situation so far confirms the importance of minimum wage. Another issue is that during the pandemic, it's very clear who are the essential workers. All essential workers, delivery service, and they are all essential. And the health workers, social service sectors, they're all essential workers. They have to continue to work despite all the risk related to the pandemic. They are essential workers. They happens to be low paid. Many of them are basically minimum wage workers. The pandemic was a bit of a wake-up call. These people are really essential. We have to appreciate the value of their work more than before. They are really the one actually who cement the society and make the society and economy actually function during the pandemic. So I think that politically, there will be some growing recognition of the value of these workers, and so that provides another important political context for the minimum wage discussion.
Thank you, Director Lee. As much as we wanted to accommodate questions from our participants, we are pressed for time, but we will assure you that we will collate and process all your questions, and we might send it to Director Lee or to Hideki for response or some word on their query. Thank you, Director Lee, for joining us today, for sharing knowledge and expertise. Indeed, it was truly a privilege to have you with us today. Before we end, we would like to have a quick photo opportunity with Director Lee. Just so you all know, Director Lee is not just Miss Patty's friend. Director Lee is also a friend of the Commission.
Okay.
A couple of years back, developed our two-tiered wage system, which ensures a protection of vulnerable workers from undue low pay, but provides sufficient space for negotiation, for productivity-based incentive scheme arising from the implementation of productivity improvement program. And you have so many fans here, Director Lee, at the office.
Hopefully in a good time, actually.
Yeah, they'll have good words for you. So we'd like to have a quick photo opportunity. Edward, can we open our camera so that we can take the quick picture before we end the session? Okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. In behalf of the National Wages and Productivity Commission and the 16 regional tripartite wages and productivity works, I would like to express personally my gratitude to Director Lee for waking up very early. It's 4 o'clock in the morning in Geneva, and I think it's very cold at this time. Thank you very much, Director Lee, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It has been really great, and I really enjoyed, and so I want to thank again for the opportunities, and also big hellos to all friends.
Yeah, you have many friends, sir.
I have a lot of friends here. Yeah.
Okay, so stay safe and keep well.
Thank you, Director Lee.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
For participants, we encourage you to further encourage your friends, your relatives to join us next week when we discuss actionable intelligence results amid uncertainty. On October 15 on business reconfiguration, on October 22 on employee engagement, and on November 5 on automating the business side of agriculture. For more information, please visit our official website. Please also like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel for replay of the previous webinar series, and follow our Twitter account. Before you leave, we would like to remind you again to fill up the evaluation forms. Let us know how we can further improve our future webinars through your valuable input. On behalf of my co-moderator, Ms. Patty Hornilia, our Deputy Executive Director, I'm Alvin Corrada. Thank you again for joining us, and see you next week.
Thank you, Sangheon. Thank you.
Thank you very
Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Arvin. Well done. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.